Long before he could lift a single dumbbell, the living room was already his arena. Couch cushions weren't for sitting. They were the ropes of a ring. The carpet wasn't just carpet. It was the grand stage of WrestleMania. He didn't simply walk into a room. He made an entrance, strutting past the coffee table like thousands of invisible fans were chanting his name. It was the golden age of wrestling, the Attitude Era bleeding into ruthless aggression. When WWE ruled television and shaped pop culture, giants like Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker, and John Cena weren't just athletes, they were living myths. The air crackled with pyro, catchphrases became playground currency, and every Monday night felt like history unfolding live. The spark didn't ignite in isolation. Maybe it was his father, who'd talk about watching Andre the Giant as a kid. Maybe it was an older cousin who recorded pay-per-view events on worn-out VHS tapes. Some in his family smiled at his obsession, others frowned, worried this was just fake fighting with no real future. The first match he ever saw live on TV became a tattoo on his memory. The lights dimmed, the crowd erupted, and his hero's theme song hit like a thunderclap. For a moment, time froze, and something inside him whispered, "This is it. This is what you're meant to do." While classmates were dreaming of becoming soccer stars, doctors, or pilots, he imagined championship belts over his shoulder, fireworks exploding above his head, and a crowd losing its mind for him. That quiet difference, that refusal to dream like everyone else, was already steering him toward a road few even dared to walk. From the outside, the gym looked more like an abandoned warehouse than the birthplace of a wrestler. Faded paint peeled from the walls, the ring ropes sagged like tired muscles, and the air carried the metallic tang of sweat that never quite left. A lone speaker in the corner buzzed with static, coughing out the riffs of an old rock anthem. The trainers were veterans with calloused hands and gravel in their voices, men who didn't bother with pep talks. Only rules. Be on time, don't complain, never skip the drills. The first time he hit the mat, the sound echoed like a rifle shot, and the breath fled his lungs before his mind could process the pain. An awkward wrist angle left a dull throb that lasted for days. A misjudged landing painted his shoulder in deep, ugly bruises. There were nights when he lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was the moment to quit. But then, somewhere in the stillness, the echo of a crowd, a memory of his childhood heroes, would rise in his head, dragging him back to the ring. Money was its own fight. Membership fees and gear cost more than he earned working late shifts at the burger joint. Some weeks, the only way to stay was to sell things he once thought he'd never part with. Every coin dropped into the trainer's palm was another wager against the odds, another gamble that the blood and bruises might one day be worth it. The work was relentless, yet in that cracked old gym under flickering fluorescent lights, a transformation had already begun, not just in muscle and skill, but in the quiet, stubborn conviction that no amount of pain would make him walk away. The crowd was thin that night, maybe 40 people scattered across metal folding chairs. But the noise, when it came, hit like thunder in a small room. Under the flickering light of a single spotlight, he shook his opponent's hand at the bell, the unspoken code of indie wrestling, and they went to work as if the eyes of the whole world were on them. Weeks earlier, he'd stepped into this strange ecosystem for the first time. A patchwork network of local promoters, handshake deals, and last-minute bookings. Matches were rarely secured with contracts. They were earned with trust, performance, and the right connections whispered backstage. The culture was old school, respect was currency, and a bad reputation could erase you faster than a bad match. The road was a constant companion. Some nights ended on a stranger's couch, others in the back seat of a cramped car parked behind a diner. Meals came from gas stations, pizza boxes balanced on dashboards, or whatever was open after midnight. There were moments of laughter, like the time a van full of wrestlers coasted into a truck stop on fumes, and moments that veered toward danger, like being stranded in the wrong part of town with gear bags on full display. He crossed paths with names that meant nothing then but would one day headline arenas. They swapped stories in damp locker rooms, traded moves in dimly lit rings, and sometimes clashed over coveted spots on the card. Main events were political prizes, and backstage drama could hit harder than any clothesline. Yet when the bell rang, all of it, the exhaustion, the rivalries, the unpaid miles, disappeared. Each match, no matter how small the crowd or how cold the venue, became a miniature WrestleMania in his mind. And sometimes, in the middle of a match, when a kid in the front row leaned forward wide-eyed or a fan asked for his autograph after, it felt less like survival and more like the first chapter of something bigger. The message came late in the afternoon. A short, almost sterile email with the words that could change a life. You've been invited to the WWE tryout. No fireworks, no dramatic music, just pixels on a screen. But for him, it landed like an entrance theme exploding through an arena. His hands shook. Somewhere between disbelief and adrenaline, the thought solidified. Don't waste this. Weeks earlier, the road to that email had been brutal before it even began. The tryout itself was a gauntlet, designed to strip away anyone who didn't belong. By the end of the first day, most were gone. The morning opened with punishing physical tests. Sprints, vertical jumps, endless push-ups, and squats until knees trembled like they were made of glass. Then came the technical drills. From simple holds to seamless chain wrestling, every movement had to hit with precision, rhythm, and ring awareness. There was no rest. The next phase turned the ring into a stage. Under the glare of studio lights, each hopeful had to cut a promo to a camera. No script, no safety net, just raw presence. The final hurdle was the interview. A quiet table, a panel of trainers and scouts, and questions that probed not just skill, but professionalism, adaptability, and whether the person sitting there could become a marketable star. When the invitation finally arrived, preparation became an obsession. Training sessions doubled. Sugar, alcohol, and every ounce of comfort were cut out. Sleep schedules were disciplined to the minute. Meals were calculated like battle plans. And under all of it, the mental game. Rehearsing how to be both calm and electric. How to make every second in the ring count without looking desperate. From the outside, it was just a tryout. Inside his head, it was the first real doorway to the empire he'd been chasing since childhood. Whether he would walk through it. That answer was waiting on the other side of the bell. The first time he walked through the NXT doors, it didn't feel like stepping into a wrestling facility. It felt like stepping onto the set of a primetime TV show. Lights hung in perfect grids. The ring gleamed under spotlights that seemed to watch you as much as you watched them. Trainers barked schedules that ran like military orders, and every movement was timed, measured, and evaluated. It was a long way from the indie scene, where chaos was part of the charm, and a good pop from the crowd could forgive almost anything. Here, mistakes weren't shrugged off. They were logged, replayed, and quietly noted on a clipboard. The culture shock was instant. Television brought its own kind of pressure. Matches weren't just for the live crowd, they were for millions of invisible viewers at home. Every punch, every glance had to be aimed at a camera lens. On his first day, he learned that hitting his finisher wasn't enough. He had to hit it, pivot, find the red light, and hold the pose for exactly 3 seconds while pyros fired on cue. And then there were the gimmicks. One week he was a snarling Viking. The next, a tennis prodigy with a temper. The week after, a mild-mannered accountant with a violent streak. Sometimes a character lived for months. Sometimes it was dead before the weekend. The constant reinvention was part challenge, part identity crisis. Working with producers, directors, and camera crews was another education. In the indies, the only camera might have been a shaky phone in the front row. Here, there were rehearsals for entrances, marks taped to the floor, and choreography for how to celebrate without stepping out of frame. Through it all, the biggest adjustment wasn't the lights or the scripts. It was the realization that this wasn't wrestling anymore. This was television, a finely tuned machine built to sell moments, and he was a moving part inside it. Whether he'd stand out or be replaced was a question no one would answer, at least not yet. It happened in the middle of a match that wasn't even televised. One mistimed suplex, one bad landing, and a lightning bolt of pain shot down his spine. His legs went numb for a heartbeat, the breath punched out of him. And yet, the crowd never knew. He pushed through the finish, sold the final move, and heard the bell before collapsing behind the curtain. That was the rule out here. The match comes first, pain comes second. And on the road, pain was constant. Fractured fingers, torn ligaments, ankles that rolled without warning, knees that clicked like old machinery. Concussions piled up silently, each one another brick in the wall toward CTE, the unspoken specter of the business. The cost was more than physical. With no comprehensive insurance, every hospital visit came out of his own pocket. Most nights, the doctor was a roll of athletic tape, a bag of ice, and whatever painkillers he could afford. You didn't heal. You just patched yourself up well enough to make the next booking. Life between shows was a grind disguised as freedom. Sleep happened wherever it could. Crammed in the back seat of a car, stretched across an airport bench, or on the floor of a locker room that smelled faintly of bleach. Meals were whatever could be eaten with one hand while driving. Protein bars, gas station chicken, a lukewarm salad in a plastic container. Gyms became moving targets, hotel fitness rooms, a set of resistance bands in a hallway, push-ups next to a vending machine. From the outside, it looked like the dream. The travel, the matches, the roar of the crowd. But on the inside, it was a delicate balancing act, holding a body together with tape, caffeine, and willpower, praying it would last long enough to see the next town. And as the miles blurred into months, the question quietly began to grow. How long before something gave way for good? He was lacing his boots when the news came. No explanation, no warning. Just a curt nod from the coordinator. "You're off. He's in." Minutes before the bell, the match he'd been preparing for was handed to someone else. From the locker room bench, he watched the replacement step into the spotlight, soak up the roar, and disappear behind the curtain with the cheers that should have been his. In this business, that's not unusual. Talent isn't always the deciding factor. Politics often plays a louder role than performance. A careless comment in the wrong hallway, a promoter with a different favorite, or a storyline rewritten overnight. Any of it could erase weeks, even months, of momentum. The locker room had its hierarchy. Leaders weren't elected, but everyone knew who they were. They had the power to advocate for you or bury you without a word. Keeping their favor was its own game, one played with handshakes, deference, and knowing when to keep your mouth shut. Sit in the wrong seat, speak at the wrong time, or push an idea to the wrong person, and suddenly, your name vanished from the booking sheet. Survival meant walking a tightrope between management and peers. Too ambitious, and you were a threat. Too passive, and you were invisible. It was a balancing act played in whispers and nods, all while wearing the mask of a professional who was happy to be here. Moments like that night stayed with him, not as singular heartbreaks, but as reminders that in wrestling, you could lose your place in line without ever stepping into the ring. And as the cheers for someone else faded down the hall, he wondered quietly how many more times he'd be asked to smile while someone else lived the moment he'd been chasing. The email came as it always did. The weekly booking sheet, neatly laid out with dates, venues, and match cards. Only this time his name wasn't there. Not once, not even in the preliminaries. No explanation, no call, just absence. It hadn't happened overnight. The slow erosion began with injuries that never fully healed. A knee that refused to bend cleanly, a shoulder that popped at the wrong moments. Age crept in between the ropes, showing itself in half-seconds lost during sequences in the way the younger talent could simply move faster. And when the company's storylines shifted, his look and style no longer fit the vision being sold. He'd seen how the legends were sent off, a montage of career highlights on the big screen, a packed arena chanting their name, flowers, fireworks, tears. His exit was the opposite. No music, no thank you, not even a handshake. One day, he was part of the machine. The next, the machine moved on without him. The adjustment hit harder than any bump. From being the center of an arena's roar, he became another face in line at the coffee shop, just another man scrolling his phone while the barista called out orders. The adrenaline was gone. So were the bright lights, the rigid schedules, the road miles, and in their place, silence. The question crept in late at night, when the crowd noise in his memory finally faded. If he wasn't a wrestler anymore, then who was he? It happened in the frozen food aisle. A stranger paused mid-step, eyes widening. "Hey, aren't you—" Before he could answer, the man was already smiling, pulling out his phone for a picture, talking about a match from years ago as if it had happened last week. He posed, smiled, and thanked him, the same way he used to after every bout. But as the fan walked away, the echo of applause lingered for only a few seconds before the hum of the supermarket returned. Life outside the ring was quieter and far more complicated. The steady paychecks from match bookings had vanished, replaced by odd jobs, sometimes unloading trucks, sometimes training at a small local gym, occasionally stepping into an indie ring for a fraction of what he once earned. Medical bills still waited in unopened envelopes, and the savings that once felt like a safety net had long since worn thin. Relationships shifted too. Family members breathed easier knowing he wasn't risking his body night after night, but the distance grew in other ways. Friends who'd once swapped road stories now had different lives, different circles. The phone buzzed less, the nights felt longer, and yet those rare moments of recognition, in a coffee shop, at a county fair, on the sidewalk outside a store, carried a strange mix of pride and melancholy. Pride that someone still remembered. Melancholy because it was a reminder of what was gone. He learned to live without the rigid schedules, the endless travel, the backstage chaos. But sometimes, late at night, a highlight reel would surface on his screen. An old entrance, the pop of a crowd that believed he was larger than life. And for a heartbeat, he was back there, under the lights, with the whole world watching. Then the video ended, and the room was quiet again.